Hey folks, this is Riker with a gaming news wrap-up video where we discuss the happenings of the week. This week's topics include new balance changes for Diablo 2 Resurrected, Lost Ark's controversial difficulty nerf, Grim Dawn's milestone, and more. As always, discussion timestamps can be found in the description below, but right before you skip ahead, just a quick reminder to ring that sub notification bell to be alerted to new Saturday episodes and stay up to date with gaming news highlights. Now, before we move on, just a quick word from this video's sponsor, Keeps, which is all about keeping your hair. About 2 out of 3 guys will experience some form of male pattern baldness by the time they reach 35. Some men like to lean into that shaved head look, but some enjoy having and styling hair and want to know if they have any options. Now, there's no magic cure for baldness, but there are preventative steps you can take to stop it from progressing and keep the hair you have. Keeps is a subscription service that focuses on making it easier and more affordable for men to treat their male pattern baldness, all from the comfort of their home using clinically proven, research-backed treatments at about half the cost of a traditional pharmacy. Physicians at Keeps will help pick the right treatment plan for you, and every treatment plan comes with a full year of unlimited messaging so you can contact your prescribing doctor at any time. And then it's as simple as subscribing and having everything you need delivered right to your door, with refill reminders sent to ensure you don't run out of what you need. Hair loss stops with Keeps. To get 50% off your first order, go to keeps.com/Riker or click the link in the description. That's keeps.com/RHYKKER. In quick last Epoch news, we got a multiplayer progress update for the upcoming ARPG. From the sounds of it, we're getting close to community testing, perhaps by April. Just my guess though, but they said their focus for March is getting the rest of the game's content working in multiplayer and ready for external alpha testing. In quick Grim Dawn news, the game celebrated its 6th anniversary this week. Since its official release, at least, it was playable in early access since 2013. The devs shared that since release, 7 million copies of the game have sold. Grim Dawn is among the top ARPGs of its generation, and if you've never played it, you can check out my old video giving an overview of the game. In quick Elden Ring news, we're now on week 1 post-launch, and the critically acclaimed game has gone from having mixed reviews on Steam to very positive. Performance issues were the main cause for the initial bad Steam reviews, but this title has been such a force in the gaming landscape that the positivity about the game's content has just overshadowed performance gripes. Steam Spy estimates 10 million copies of the game have sold so far. And the devs actually put out a message about the performance issues, rather an apology, and a promise that patches would come to fix the issues. My question to you folks is, how forgiving are you of performance issues in a game? If a game was otherwise fantastic, but let's say for example it ran at a terrible frame rate, would you give it a good or a bad review? Sound off in the comments. In Lost Ark news, in a controversial update this week, the devs nerfed the difficulty of some of the game's content in response to Western player feedback. A number of T1 and T2 Guardian raids and Abyss dungeons had their difficulty tuned to make things easier, and the community's been divided in their reaction to this. Some feel it's catering to casual Western players, with the implication being that Western audiences are worse at video games. Some feel that it will result in players not being adequately trained for the T3 content, and thus increasing the number of players reaching Tier 3 without a solid enough understanding of how to counter boss mechanics, thereby resulting in poorer T3 matchmaking experiences. A great amount of the challenge in these encounters comes from a lack of understanding or a lack of familiarity, rather, with the mechanics of a particular fight. There's a lot of fights in Lost Ark that if you don't understand the mechanics, if you don't know how it works, you're not going to beat it. Or you'll luck into having a group that manages to cover for you, and you manage to blithely get by, not understanding that you would have failed if you didn't have your teammates doing the objective or properly responding to the mechanic. And there are Lost Ark veterans that don't want to see these mechanics nerfed in a way that allows players to basically ignore them. They want new players to be trained to understand that learning a boss's mechanic is mandatory, not optional. If you can just sit there in front of the boss and keep mashing your buttons until you win, then you're not learning anything about the fight. You're not learning that there are mechanics you must avoid, you must dodge, you must respond to things actively in the middle of a fight when new objectives appear that you have to go grab, that you gotta move away from, positioning. And by the way, Maxwell.gg has guides on all the mechanics of the boss fights for you to learn, so it's not like there's a lack of material out there for people to figure these things out. But I digress. On the other side of the equation, there are people that feel the nerfs are fine. When the game first came out, when it first released in Korea, there was a time when T1 was the final content of the game. And then T2 was the final content of the game, so players spent a long time on this content, so it had to be challenging. People were going to be playing it for a long time. There was enough time to be worth spent on learning these mechanics, conquering the content. But now, in the Western version of the game launched with T1, T2, and T3 content, so T1 and T2 is just pit stops that some players spend a couple days on, maybe others will spend a couple weeks on, but it's all leading to T3, so there's no need, these players argue, to make T1 and T2 so challenging that new players remain stuck for months. They point out that now T1 and T2 content, it's meant to just be basically farmed on a daily basis. It's meant to be something that's rendered easy, effectively. That the current difficulty, as it stands, relative to its reward, makes the content more tedious, if anything, after that first initial thrill of beating it. They also point out that in the Korean and Russian versions of the game, players are sped through to T3 content, since that's considered to be when the game really starts. Now, one thing that both camps seem to agree on is the nerfing of the hit points of Guardian raids. Since in the Western release, these bosses have 50% more hit points, which simply makes fights last longer without being more challenging in a meaningful way. However, about that 50% more HP seems to be a community misconception. That number's been floating around. People seem to believe it, and I think it's a placebo effect. Some research seems to suggest that people that have actually tried to analyze the numbers and come up with concrete statistics comparing the hit points of the American, the Western versions, and the Korean versions, it seems there's actually no difference, so I guess we just suck. But I digress. I turn the question to you folks, where do you fall in this debate? Do you agree with the nerfs, or do you disagree? One thing I will say is that I'm definitely happy about the nerf to the Necromancer's Origin, where Sigmund's color wave has now been made more pronounced. For the life of me, I could not see the color before that. It was a guessing game of whether I pick red or white. Now, I've run Necromancer's Origin post-update, and I can actually tell what color to go for. Is that a difficulty adjustment? It's a quality of life. Do I suck because my eyes are bad? Do I have to learn to see better? What is that training me? Apart from balance changes, the content update introduced the Argos Abyss Raid. Abyss Raids are basically Guardian Raids on steroids. Not only are they more challenging, but you can go in with a party of 8 players. The fight has 3 phases, with the boss getting more powerful and different mechanics every phase, and each phase has its own rewards and different item level requirements. New story questline content was also added for players at item level 1100, but, and I know everyone's always asking this, no word yet on new classes, skins, or ranked PvP. In Diablo 2 Resurrected news, a new PTR test server patch went up for upcoming patch 2.4, with promising changes. We'll go through the highlights in a moment, but as a quick synopsis, we're seeing another round of balance changes that continues to help off-meta choices become more viable. We also learned a rough timeline of what to expect with respect to launch dates. This is expected to be the final PTR before launch. Once this PTR ends, it'll be a couple weeks before patch launch, and then another week or 2 before the ladder starts to ensure that there's no bugs when ladder starts. Specific dates will come as we draw closer, but we're basically looking at the end of March or early April, is my guess. So as for the changes that were brought with this update, we saw the changes implemented to Uber Diablo, how he spawns. It used to be that he would spawn on specific server IPs, so there's this whole subculture of people going on MIRC and logging IPs and all the super hackerman stuff. Now, instead, Uber Diablo will spawn for everyone in the same region regardless of what server instance you are on. I think this was a fantastic game. I had Uber Diablo spawn in my game a couple times. Got to kill him. It was a nice, pleasant surprise. This is going to make this content far more accessible to people. It's going to make people run into it more. Maybe they won't be able to defeat Uber Diablo, but hey, at least you're going to know he exists, because it is entirely possible that someone could have played Diablo for years, Diablo 2 for years, and never accidentally stumbled upon Uber Diablo. And you can type /Uber Diablo in chat to see how the progress is going, because it's still based on selling SOJs to vendors. That's something that was easy to do in PTR because we have basically an infinite supply of SOJs. So it's unclear how rare this will be on live servers, but nonetheless a good change, and they can always tune the number of SOJs needed to be sold over time. As for specific class changes, we're seeing for Amazon a buff to Impale and Plague Javelin, a little bit more viability there, and then Physical Boazon, big buff, multiple shot, synergy with Guided Arrow, and vice versa. We're also seeing Strafe and Immolation Arrow getting some buffs, so overall, Boazon's looking like they're in a much better spot, especially for early game. They're not going to be as item dependent, they're going to be a lot stronger on a relatively cheap budget. Is this going to be an S tier build? Is this going to be a top build? No, it's not going to break the meta, but Boazon's more viable. Some tiny changes to assassin skills, but the bigger change will come later on via itemization. We'll cover that in a bit. Barbarian, we're seeing some improvements to leap attack. They're making the leap itself an attack. Basically now when you land, you're dealing damage. They're buffing all the masteries, mostly with regards to how much attack bonus you're getting from it. And super interesting and significant, throwing mastery now has an added chance to not consume quantity per level up to 50%. So that means the more points you have in throwing mastery, the less ammo you are consuming while throwing, and critical strikes with throwing weapons now replenish quantity. Fantastic change. Half of this is drawn explicitly from the community. It was explicitly a community suggestion to more points in throwing mastery makes you consume less ammo. Fantastic to see that the devs are paying attention, they're listening. And then the other cool thing is that they have this double factor going on. Not only do more points make it that you use less ammo, but now with crits, you manage to recover ammo. So now it's making crits do something interesting apart from just more damage. Oh, maybe I want to stack even more crit on my build so that I'm consuming even less ammo. So overall, these changes certainly make the throw barb a lot more viable. He's not going to be a top meta build, but viable and not miserable to play because you're running out of ammo every 30 seconds. That was a huge issue. Just the quality of life was miserable for a throw barb. This is such a step forward in that regard. Then the Druid, we're seeing some buffs to Armageddon by removing Hurricane as a skill requirement, so you can get straight to there faster for an Elemental Druid. Some other buffs to that as well, but most exciting for the Druid is the Summoner Druid. Druids can now have Spirit Wolves, Dire Wolves, and Bears all summoned at the same time. The Druid was previously restricted into how big he can make his little pet zoo grow. Now you can be the full Zoomancer. You can have all your good boys out, and again, is this going to be a top build competitive with a Hammered In? Absolutely not, but it is so much better. I killed Uber Diablo with a Zoomancer Druid. It wasn't fast and it was ugly, but I did it. On the shapeshifting side of things, they are actually reverting back to their original attack speed calculation, but they are also buffing the attack speed cap for Werewolf, doubling it 75% to 150, and they're also buffing Fury's attack speed. So they're doubling down on their original idea and giving even more attack speed. They really want the Werewolf to fulfill the fantasy of the super fast attacker, and then the Werebear instead also getting an attack speed cap increase, but making him deal more damage and be tankier. So some nice buffs to the Shapeshifter Druid. Necromancer, not a whole lot here. We're seeing some attack damage increase to the Blood Golem and the Fire Golem. It's not really going to make any significant changes. Paladin Thorns is now dealing flat damage and percentage. There was always that debate on whether Thorns should be dealing a flat amount of damage or should be dealing a portion of the damage dealt to you. ¿Por qué no los dos? Why not both? This is a great idea. Though I am surprised that they're not extending this change to Thorns to all instances of Thorns in the game and simply to some of them, like the Thorns aura on the Paladin. We're also seeing them bring back a new idea that they introduced with these damage auras. They had this really cool idea that they added and then removed throughout PTR, where the closer you are to the paladin and his aura, the more damage you're taking. And they ended up getting rid of that. Now they've brought it back, which I think is a great idea. It's a new idea they added to the game that is mechanically interesting. They've just adjusted it, and fingers crossed I'll be happy with it now. But they made that adjustment to all of the offensive auras. And very significant, Holy Bolt and Fists of the Heavens now damages demons in addition to undead. Used to be that it was just against undead. That was a huge limiting factor in Fists of the Heavens paladin builds. Now, demons and undead, that's most of the enemies you fight. Having a build that could only damage, a significant segment, but a segment of the enemies you fight, not that great. But now that we're able to affect most, demons, all the act bosses are demons and undead. Not only does it make sense lore-wise, but it's also a fantastic change. Is this competitive with the Hammered In? No. Is this a big buff, a significant buff, a huge increase in viability to a Fist of the Heavens Paladin? Yes. Sorceress, almost nothing, Nova mana cost reduced. Then for the Mercenaries, Rogue Archer can now use Amazon bows and benefits from plus to Amazon skills. Nice buff. Interesting, makes her more viable. Will she be meta? Probably not. The Iron Wolf, swap frozen armor for chilling armor. Iron Wolf, not meta, not close, no chance. Barbarian Warrior now benefits from plus Barbarian skills, and they've added a new type that you can hire, cannot use two-handed swords, but he can dual wield. Uses Frenzy Taunt and Iron Skin, and this is actually more useful. Is it going to replace the Act 2 Mercenary? Probably not, but this Mercenary is actually really good at killing enemies now. He can solo Hell Bale in like 30 seconds. Geared appropriately, of course. Then on the rune words, and this is the significant change to the Assassin, is Plague can now be used on claws and daggers in addition to swords. So Plague rune word on claws, that's the significant change / buff to Assassins. And Infinity, Obedience, and Pride can now be used by spears and Amazon spears. Infinity on a spear, this is a potential game changer. They've also increased unique monster density in the new level 85 areas. Great change, of course. That covers the brunt of things, although there is one bug fix here. Fix an issue where one of the Chaos Sanctuary seals was difficult to select. I just thought I was always bad at clicking? It's like, why am I clicking on this wrong? They've fixed, this was a bug all these years, and they've now fixed it. But perhaps the most exciting changes are the new bugs that have popped up in the character select screens that have resulted in this Boner Spear Necromancer, courtesy of Redditor Keswick, and the Retail Worker Barbarian, who's showing off the new Spring 2022 Kathan Klein collection. I mean, how does this bug even happen? Seriously. The no physics flail, I get that, but how do you manage to attach an armor piece to the top of your shaft? I love it. And speaking of hilarious things, I love a new episode of Carbot's Diablo 2 series has gone up all about fighting Uber Diablo. And that's going to wrap up this week's video, but do be sure to have checked out last week's video in which we discussed how some Lost Ark players are outraged over a new set of cosmetic skins. Thanks for watching. Special thanks to my Twitch, Patreon, and YouTube supporters for making these videos possible. If you like what you see on this channel and want to support the creation of more content, you can consider pledging on YouTube or Patreon and unlocking behind-the-scenes content, monthly virtual hangouts, and more. If you enjoyed this video, please share it. Check out these other videos and subscribe to join Riker's Raiders for more gaming content.